Hi everyone, I'm Sam. Today we're going to talk about economics. While it might feel like economics as a formal subject started just a couple of centuries ago, some seeds of economic thought have been around for millennia. Ancient philosophers, from Aristotle in Greece to Kautilya in India, pondered the role of wealth and trade in society. They were curious about why some cities thrived while others stagnated, and how resources should be distributed among citizens. Even though they wouldn't have called themselves economists, these early thinkers raised questions that still echo today. The concept of a marketplace, where people gather to exchange items, dates back to prehistory. Over time, these markets became more structured. Different regions started specializing in producing certain goods, like spices in the East, textiles in Europe, etc., and global trade routes emerged. We can imagine caravans laden with silk and jewels crisscrossing the deserts, while ships sailed the seas to bring exotic products to hungry buyers. As trade networks grew in complexity, so did the need to understand, forecast, and organize the flow of goods and money. Fast forward to the 18th century, and meet Adam Smith, often called the father of modern economics. If you picture a wise Scottish gentleman with a kind face and an affinity for thinking deep thoughts, that's our guy. In 1776, Smith published The Wealth of Nations, which argued that individual self-interest, when allowed to operate within a system of free markets, can lead to overall prosperity. He famously described an invisible hand guiding each person's decisions to eventually benefit society as a whole. Smith's ideas were revolutionary. Before him, many believed wealth was simply a matter of hoarding gold and silver. If you've ever heard of the term mercantilism, that was the school of thought at the time. But Smith said, wait, maybe wealth isn't just about stockpiling precious metals. Perhaps it's about producing goods efficiently, trading freely, and allowing competition to flourish. In simpler terms, he showed that it's not just what resources you have, but how you use them, that creates economic growth. Smith opened the floodgates for other thinkers to weigh in on how markets work. David Ricardo introduced the idea of comparative advantage, suggesting that even if a country isn't the best at producing anything, it can still benefit by specializing in what it's least bad at relative to others. This is how global trade can help all participating nations grow richer, by focusing on strengths, or at least relative strengths, and trading accordingly. Thomas Malthus had a more pessimistic view. In 1798, he wrote about population growth potentially outstripping food supply. Malthus worried that the world's resources couldn't keep up with its growing population. Though technology has so far proved many of Malthus's dire predictions wrong, his concerns about scarcity remain a cornerstone of economics. Resources are always limited, and people's wants generally exceed what's available. In the 19th century, a completely different voice rose to prominence: Karl Marx. While Smith was an optimist about the invisible hand, Marx was deeply critical of the free market system. He argued that capitalist societies exploit workers, paying them less than the value they produce. His ideas sparked debates about class struggles, the distribution of wealth, and the role of government in regulating markets. Marx's works later fueled socialist and communist movements around the globe, dramatically shaping global politics in the 20th century. While many of these regimes collapsed or reformed, the discussions Marx started about fairness, labor rights, and inequality are far from over. Modern debates about income inequality, minimum wage, and corporate accountability can trace their lineage to Marx's critique of capitalism. Now, let's skip ahead to the early 20th century. The Roaring 1920s ended in a massive economic collapse, the Great Depression of the 1930s. Unemployment rates soared, banks failed, and people lost their life savings. Against this grim backdrop, a British economist named John Maynard Keynes emerged. Keynes argued that governments should step in to stabilize economies during downturns. In other words, if people and businesses aren't spending, the government should become the spender of last resort by investing in infrastructure, creating jobs, and boosting demand. This was a big deal, because until then, many believed in laissez-faire, that is, leaving markets alone to sort out their own problems. Keynes's idea that governments could and should manage economic cycles transformed economic policy, especially in post-World War II America and Europe. Just when Keynesian economics was riding high, another prominent figure entered the scene: Milton Friedman. He championed monetarism, emphasizing the role of central banks and the control of the money supply in regulating inflation and growth. Friedman questioned the extent of government intervention in the economy, arguing that too much interference could stifle competition and create inefficiencies. Today, debates still rage between proponents of more government intervention, often labeled Keynesians, and those who favor less intervention, often called monetarists or neoclassical economists. Though we've seen countless variations and new schools of thought, from new Keynesians to supply-siders, the tug-of-war between government-led and market-led solutions continues. One of the simplest, yet most fundamental ideas in economics is scarcity. Think of your own life. You only have so many hours in a day, and you can't do everything you'd like. If you decide to watch a movie, you're giving up time you could have spent studying, exercising, or hanging out with friends. This trade-off is basically what economists mean by opportunity cost, the value of the next best thing you didn't do. In the larger economy, the same principle applies. Governments must choose how to spend their budgets on healthcare, roads, education, or defense. Companies decide whether to invest in technology or marketing. Whenever we make one choice, we forgo another. Economics tries to help us think systematically about these trade-offs. Remember the bustling marketplace at the start of this story? At every stall, supply and demand are playing out like a never-ending dance. Supply is how much of a product or service is available, and demand is how much people want it. The price is like the DJ's song choice. If a good is in high demand but short supply, prices go up. If there's too much supply or too little demand, prices fall. A real-life example might be the sudden spike in prices for gaming consoles during holiday season. If there aren't enough consoles to meet the holiday shopping frenzy, expect the price to rise, or expect store shelves to be empty. Understanding supply and demand is crucial not just for markets, but for everything from wage negotiations to house prices. Economists love measuring things to see how they change over time. One key figure is gross domestic product, GDP, which tracks the total value of goods and services produced in a country. Think of it as a country's annual report card. If GDP grows, it typically means there's more economic activity going on, people buying, selling, and producing more. But growth isn't always comfortable. Sometimes an economy can heat up so fast that prices begin to rise. This is called inflation. If you've ever noticed how candy bars cost more now than they did when you were a kid, that's inflation. Small, steady inflation can be a sign of a healthy, growing economy, but too much of it can erode purchasing power, making life more expensive. For the longest time, economists assumed that people are rational actors who always make decisions that maximize their well-being. But in recent years, a field called behavioral economics has emerged to challenge that notion. Behavioral economists study the psychological, emotional, and cultural factors that influence decisions, like why we might buy something on impulse even though we know we shouldn't. A famous experiment in behavioral economics involves something known as the anchoring effect. If a store marks a dress as 50% off, we often think it's a great deal, even if the original price was artificially inflated. Understanding these human quirks helps governments and businesses create policies or strategies that align better with how people actually behave, not just how we wish they behaved. One of the biggest shifts in economics over the past century is the explosion of data and the methods to analyze it. Econometrics is essentially the application of statistical methods to economic data. This might sound dull, but it's like giving economists a giant telescope to see patterns they never spotted before. With the help of computers, economists can analyze massive data sets, everything from income levels across regions to how changes in tuition fees affect college enrollment. Econometrics has led to better forecasting tools, more accurate evaluations of policy, and, hopefully, fewer missteps in guiding our economies. However, it's still an inexact science. Correlation doesn't always mean causation, and real-world complexity can't always be perfectly captured in numbers. Another hot topic is inequality, how wealth is spread out across different groups of people. In many countries, the gap between the richest and the poorest has widened in recent decades. Economists debate why this is happening. Is it due to technological changes that favor highly educated workers, globalization that outsources jobs, tax policies that benefit the wealthy? Some economists argue that inequality spurs competition, encouraging people to innovate and climb the economic ladder. Others warn that too much inequality breeds social unrest and unfairness, making it harder for people at the bottom to succeed. These debates are ongoing and deeply rooted in societal values about fairness and opportunity. As we learn more about climate change, economics finds itself increasingly tangled in questions about sustainability. Traditional economic growth has often come hand in hand with environmental damage, from deforestation to carbon emissions. Now economists are working on how to factor in environmental costs like pollution or resource depletion into GDP calculations or tax structures through things like carbon taxes. The controversy lies in balancing short-term economic gains with long-term planetary well-being. Should industries face stricter regulations even if it slows economic growth? Or should we rely on free markets and technological innovation to solve environmental problems? These questions remain central to shaping how we approach both economics and global policy. Robots and artificial intelligence aren't just sci-fi fantasies anymore. They're a big part of today's economy. Automated assembly lines, algorithmic trading, and self-checkout machines are changing the way we work and the skills we need to succeed. This has led to widespread anxiety about job displacement and the future of labor markets. Economists are divided on how this might play out. Some say new technologies always create new kinds of jobs to replace old ones, just as the Industrial Revolution once did. Others worry about a large skills gap, where many people could be left behind. This is not just an economic issue, but a human one, involving education policy, social safety nets, and our shared vision of how society should adapt to technological change. Ever since ships first sailed between continents, trade has been a defining feature of economic life. In recent years, however, there's been a growing wave of skepticism about globalization. Some argue that free trade agreements have disadvantaged local workers, while others say free trade fosters innovation and lowers consumer prices. Thus, countries grapple with whether to open borders to goods and services, or erect tariffs and quotas to protect their own industries. Critics of protectionism point out that it can lead to trade wars, higher consumer prices, and less global cooperation. But supporters say it might save jobs in certain sectors and maintain national security. As with many economic debates, there's no simple, one-size-fits-all solution. What makes economics so fascinating isn't just the data, charts, or formulas. It's the people. Economists who question each other's assumptions, politicians who enact policies that might or might not work, everyday citizens who feel the impact in their wallets and lifestyles. Throughout history, economics has been shaped by passionate debates. Adam Smith wrote from a sense of moral philosophy, pondering how a society could flourish ethically and materially. Marx approached economics from a sense of justice, outraged by the mistreatment of workers. Keynes was moved by the devastation of the Great Depression, searching for a practical solution to joblessness. Friedman championed individual freedom, believing that people, not governments, should make the key economic decisions. Even today, economists attend conferences, publish papers, and argue vigorously about every topic under the sun, from what causes recessions to how to fix housing shortages. Far from being a dry theoretical subject, economics is a vibrant, evolving conversation about what kind of world we want to live in and how we can get there. For all the progress made, economics remains full of puzzles. Here are just a few. Predicting crises. Why is it so hard to foresee major financial crashes, like the one in 2008? Economists have developed models to explain crises after they happen, but predicting them accurately beforehand remains elusive. Behavioral quirks. If humans are not perfectly rational, how do we build models that capture our emotional, social, and often irrational behaviors? Measuring well-being. Is GDP the best way to gauge a society's success? Some economists propose alternative measures like the Genuine Progress Indicator or happiness indexes, but these remain on the fringes. Long-term sustainability. How do we make sure future generations inherit an economy and a planet that isn't depleted? Balancing growth with environmental and social concerns is a major frontier. Universal basic income. Could providing every citizen with a guaranteed base salary simplify welfare systems and reduce inequality, or would it discourage work and strain government budgets? Each question opens the door to new research, new data, and new debates, And the more we learn, the more we realize just how complex the interplay of money, resources, politics, and human nature really is. By now, you might be thinking, okay, this is interesting stuff, but how does it affect me? The short answer, in countless ways. When you apply for a job, take out a loan, pay your taxes, or buy groceries, you're part of the economic system. Understanding even a little bit of how that system works can help you make more informed decisions about personal finance, voting, and navigating career choices. On a broader level, economics helps us confront the big issues of our time: inequality, climate change, technological disruption, global trade, and beyond. Being economically literate can empower you to engage with these problems and influence the policies that shape our collective future. That's it for today, and I'll see you in the next episode.